very special conference for me personally. It's one very close to my heart simply because I was the lead organizer for this conference when it happened last in 2018. And I'm really thankful for the organizers, which was Aisha and everyone who spent the last several months organizing this. And I think this is mostly team and artists of that. So really thankful for them for taking up 9/11 again and helping organize this. Before I start, I would like to add that I feel there's so many people over here, but we don't have very strong, I mean, we just had a really great talk, which was contribution. I think one part of open source is community work and helping organize meetups and conferences and all of that stuff as well. So I hope that after attending this conference, that there are more people who get interested and are really contributing to this ecosystem. Sometimes it's not about sponsorship. It's just as simple as doing a meetup at your office and inviting everyone over there and share it. So the talk I've chosen today is going to be on microservices. This is an interesting topic because over the last year or so, we've been hearing, so microservices had taken over the world at one point, but I think the interest has peaked now. Everyone has started questioning, is this the right move? Should we be using microservices at all? But before I go in, I would love to understand from people here, how many people here are using microservices today? Just to show hands, right? A lot of people here. And how many people here are struggling with the complexity of microservices? Show hands. All right, almost the same people. Excellent. So you're going to enjoy my talk then. Is anybody here currently using Modular Monolith? Or, all right, I've got 2 or 3 people using Modular. Oh, quite crazy. Please come to me. I'd love to hear more about how you guys are using Modular Monolith. And if the ones that are presented today, maybe So as introduced, I'm from Taleemabad, and Taleemabad is a tech startup based here in Islamabad, close by. And we are focused on improving the quality of education. We believe that the biggest problem in Pakistan right now is, in fact, not just any education, we're focused on private education. Because we feel that once a child has passed 5th grade, the foundations are setting. And then we can choose to blame universities for not having great candidates coming out, but it's actually not their fault. 50% of students in Pakistan struggle to read a sentence in English in grade 5. Said that as a negative. 50% of students can't read a single sentence in English in grade 5. That is really, really bad, right? So how do we improve this? Throughout the world, there's a term that's used a lot, and that's called personalized learning. We need to bring learning to that individual level. And over the last decade, there's been different interventions happening trying to do that. But I think one major change that's happened over the last year or the last 2 years is the introduction of LLMs and AI, which now actually changes how we can give personalized learning to these students. So a lot of the work that we do around working with teachers, parents, students themselves, or the school owners or the government is all around that. So if you'd like to know more about this, reach out to me. I'll be here for the next expo and do talk more about this. But I want to start with the story. So when I joined Taleemabad in 2022, this was the exact scene in the office. Because we were onboarding users who were onboarding schools at that time. Our database was spiking hard all over the place. The services were timed out. Our AWS account was hacked, and keys were compromised and were used for crypto machines. So we had a backup of 11,000 using build. It was just complete chaos. Now, I'm not going to attribute all of that to microservices, but the point over here is that when I started going into the infrastructure to to try to debug what was happening or try to make sense of all of this, I just ran the workloads. Logging wasn't configured properly. We didn't have good monitoring, so it was just impossible to see what requests were doing what. So overall, while microservices was the case in that, one of the questions that I started asking myself was, is this a microservice that I'm interacting with? Is this it? So a question for everyone here. What is a microservice? What do you guys think is a microservice? Just shout out. What do you think are the properties of a microservice? Small.
Capability.
Reliability. Oh.
Advanced idle coding.
Idle coding. Independently deployable. So one of the thought leaders in this space is Martin Fowler. How many people here have heard of Martin Fowler? Right? Everybody should have, because he's done some really great work in this space. He has a great blog, and I'm going to share links of that for reference as well. So he defines in his articles, these are the properties of a good microservice, what we should call a microservice. Right? And if I try to look at it, was our application microservices, were these services small? Yeah, they were small. It was a small code base at this stage, so not to worry about that. Was these service code someone task? Stretching the definition a little bit, but okay, fine. We can let them pass. Like redundant context. This is one of the hardest things in microservices, and this was definitely the part where everything was falling apart, because the requests were going all over the place. What is autonomous? Well, I think somebody tried it, but unfortunately, they were all linked to the same database instance, which meant that a single service could take down all the services. So technically not. They weren't deployed independently, either. They were all deployed at the same time. And because of the bound context, they were not closely coupled. Right? So what I, in fact, thought was a microservice was not microservice. And I believe that everybody who here thought that they were working on microservices might want to go back and reflect, were they actually working on microservices, and really understand what they actually are. I have many people who would have this Monolith and then add a Node.js application to it, and they say, oh, now we have microservices, which is almost even not what microservices are. So I think a lot of the problem starts from here, that microservices are just sometimes misunderstood. But let's assume we all understand what microservices are. Is it a good choice for the stream systems that you can do it? So this is the question we want to answer today in this presentation. And of course, if you look at the greatest that's out there, the answer we all know is independence. And this is a really hard one now. What does it depend on? How do we make that choice? And I'm hoping that over the next few slides, I'm going to ask several questions. But the most important part that I want you to take away is how we build the context. And the context changes with every single variable. And I know that all my context is something that I have a lot of experience. So I have over the last 10 years worked mostly with Sparks. So all that I'm talking about here does not apply to each price application or any other big application. Right? So I'm looking at it from a very, very specific lens. So, first question, are you going to build a large, complex system all in one go? Right? That's the first question you should be asking. Okay, is this project actually that? Now, that was what we answered the question, in microservices, not. There's also another question which is very important, and that's about the domain knowledge. Right? Because mostly the architecture is designed by technical folks, and technical folks are not part of the domain. And having worked with several startups, I spend a lot of time just understanding the domain first. Right? But a lot of us don't have that luxury. So if you don't have that luxury, then will you be able to make the right architecture for the application you're about to build? Or do you want to build something that's a lot smaller, that's complex, and then slowly scale it into something that is more domain focused? So one of my favorite terms over here, when we talk about large-scale applications, is 9 out of 10 startups out there are going to fail, right? and they're going to fail before they get complex stuff at the industry part. This is very nice graph from Martin Fowler's website, where he shares that microservices have something called microservices screening. But that screening only hits when you pass this threshold stage for basic complexity. And my argument over here is that most startups fail before they hit this basic complexity. So you start off with something, but you're never able to reach that level of use. You're not able to get that value level. You get all the complexity in the start, you get a lower productivity in the start, but you don't get that value because you're never going to get it. So, and I'm not saying not to use microservices here. I'm just saying we have to understand the context. There are many different types of startups as well. It's not all startups are the same. But is this your use case as well? So that's something. Another big place where I see a lot of companies struggle is with health. We understand that microservices is complex, and for that, you need people who are experienced, who have done it before, and who can do it at scale. How big is your team? So if it's just 2 people and they have to manage 10 different repositories, you can already imagine the overhead that's going to pay for your team. And at least in my experience, most startups have small teams. Like most startups, not all of them. So if you do have a small team, then you might have an architect based on that. And then there's a question of expertise in Monolith. Right? Most of the interviews that I do, people struggle to create good monoliths that are no microservices, right? And a microservice, we know, is the fixed state monoliths. So we have to keep these questions in mind as we're building these teams, and it's like an architecture. Is that it's not just a decision about how is it right now, but what will happen to it as it scales outwards and upwards into the full cloud. Yeah. So if you have too much complexity in the start, it might become overwhelming for your team later on. Another interesting aspect is money. And as we know, startups have limited funding and budget. So one of the issues that you run into is, let's take an example of database. And if you have a microservice, you're going to be running a database for a service team. And if you're running on AWS, that's 4 RDS instances will be running over there. Versus 1 if you're running a single one, or something, right? So now, nothing wrong with running 4 databases or using microservices again, right? But are you able to extract that value out of those microservices that you made the premium for, right? So that's the thing that you have to continuously ask at each question, at each stage, just to understand and select the right part. This is my favorite part. I think there is, at least in the startup ecosystem, there's this illusion of scale. And a lot of the projects that I come to, and ask them why they chose to build this microservices. They're going to go, oh, we're going to have millions of users, right? Okay, how many users do you have today? 10, right? You don't need microservices, I'm sorry. So if you take all of this into account, last one is uncertainty. So when you're building a startup, a lot of the time, all you're doing is focus on customer discovery and validation. And just to give you my personal experience over the last year, we've changed our architecture almost 3 times over the last year because we keep coming up with a new product every 2 months. Because we find out something new and that changes everything that we think about. Not all startups again are like this. I've worked in startups that are a lot more stable, but it depends on your startup, and you have to foresee this. Am I going to be anticipate a lot of uncertainty or not that much? Am I deploying something like a e-commerce store that is a lot more standard versus something like what we're doing where there's a lot more research and changes coming? Well, one of the things that I struggle to do in startups is figure out how the stable bounded context for the services, right? So you can choose the microservices, but if your product is changing a lot, it becomes almost impossible to maintain stable bounded context across your microservices because all your entities are moving all over the place, right? So this is something you need to consider when you're choosing your. So I've asked a lot of questions, but how do you make that choice? Again, I'm going to point to our publishers, and there's this great article, and this is not a new article, this is from 2015, where Martin Fowler suggested that we should build monoliths first, right? The idea is very simple. You start with the simplest project possible, and as the complexity increases, you start adapting to it. You start extracting services from it one by one. And then over time, you will see as the complexity increases, you would have extracted out all your services and you would have microservices. Now, mind you, it is also mentioned in the article that microservices do not apply to all sorts of problems. I think that's also important to understand. It's not more than that. There are other architectures to consider, maybe for the problem that you are working on. There's also the option for sacrificial architecture, where you say after 2 years, I'm going to come in and delete the whole code base and rewrite it. Well, easier said than done. We know rewrites are super hard to execute and they have a lot of other problems, but you have an option there. And then because you're on the internet, you can always find a command prompt, right? And this is on Martin Fowler's website, but it's not written by him, it's written by one of his colleagues, and it makes a very, very valid point. He says you can start with a monolith with this intention of moving to microservices in the future, but we know that we're not disciplined enough to maintain that modularity where that's needed. So what ends up happening is that when you have reached a level of complexity, the code base is in a state where you're just not able to do that. It becomes so hard that you have to suffer deep consequences. And this is where the whole idea of this modular monolith comes in. What if you could apply the rules of microservices in a monolith? Right. This is obviously not a new idea, but surprisingly, what I couldn't find was a formal definition for a modular monolith. But this is what I've been able to understand so far. And this is what I've been implementing so far as well. So the basic concept of a modular monolith is that you have a very, very standard monolith. It's a single code base, it's a single application. But you organize your code in a very specific way. I'm going to talk about what that specific way is. And that essentially allows you to have an architecture that scales up better and then converts into a microservice architecture in the future if you wanted to still adopt. So where do we start from? We start from the layer architecture. I hope everyone here knows layer architecture. That's like one-on-one architecture, where we have a very, very basic layer on the top with the APIs and the user interface. Then you have your business logic, then you have your data stores and data communication. And this is a modular architecture, but if I compose this into modules, this is what we're trying to get to. Right? We just want our code to be organized a little bit better, but all in the same place. Another way to look at this is one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to have loose coupling with time. So what happens usually in a monolith, especially as it grows, it's very easy to pull references from here. You put the model here, you put that reference here, and then before you know it, all your modules are using all other modules, and there's certain dependencies, and you're using all sorts of hacks to make sure everything is all right. But what if you could have that is all? What if you have something like that green line that just connects to modules? So this is basically, if you look at it, this is what Microservices does, right? It creates this boundary that you have this API that you connect to and you talk with the modules, and nothing else is the same. They're all separate. So I went around and I started looking at how do I go around building this project. And this is one of the repositories that I came up with. So in this repository, they have done a very basic setup of a distribution center and a transport and delivery databases, and explain how to implement modular monoliths using it. But the most important thing here, and something I started off with, is basically what we're trying to do with the modular monolith is we're trying to define the principles of microservices inside of monolith. And you define them so that you can organize that code better, so that in the future, you are able to extract out those modules as services if you need, and we understand that there's a 90% chance that you need that. And again, this will look familiar, right? For those who've been building microservices, we're creating boundary context. We have these APIs that are communicating with each other. And how this looks in code is basically we're introducing these concepts of services between modules. So instead of calling the core directly in a particular module, you are using a service to fetch the data or to fetch whatever you want from another module. So here's some code from the repository I shared. And over here, in a microservice, normally you would not be keeping foreign keys in that particular one, right? So here you go. Now, I think it's important to understand over here that you don't have to start with this, right? Like modular monoliths are not really a golden nugget that's used for every application. If you choose to do this, then this could also be an intermediate state for you. You can start off with foreign keys in the start, and then you migrate into something of this version later on. So we don't have any foreign keys over here. So each module, even though it's the same project, it lives together. And we have different Django apps that represent different modules. And then we create these services, which can then be consumed by other modules as needed, right? And here's another example where I'll simply call the shipping guide service in another serialized another model, and that will consume. So there's no actual model being used inside of that. So there's no cross model use to this. We're doing segregated. And what's the purpose of this? The whole idea over here is to create a structure that will help allow you to maintain your code in a specific way. That's it, right? And that allows you to keep your code clean. And then as you scale upwards, you're then able to transform it into microservices if you need to. Now, one of the cool things is that you can extend this modular monolith in many different ways. And within Django, one of the cool features it has is you have multiple databases. So again, you don't need to do this, but if you feel that you want to segregate databases on a module level, it's basically just a configuration as I'm going to say Django. So super easy to do that. And then there's that whole question of scale, right? One of the biggest use cases for microservices was, oh, I can scale that one service, and I don't have to scale everything else. Well, you can technically do that over here as well if you want. This is the architecture, the infrastructure diagram for the same repository. And you can see over here that we are using the same image, the same Django image, the same code base, and we're deploying multiple ECS services in an infrastructure. Right? So you will have a shipping service, you will have a distribution service, so each module will have its own service. And why do you want to do that? Because you can then route to those services using something like Kong or anything or whatever you guys do. And basically, this is looking like microservices at this stage, right? You have separate databases, you have separate services for each, but it's all still involved, right? You still have relatively reduced complexity for your code. And all of this is, again, like identity is so off, right? You don't have to start with this. You can start with the most basic version, and then you can build up these things within your monolith as you scale up. So the way I see it, it's basically monoliths with a border tooling. And I think the border tooling is allowing us to do all these new useful things within the monolith itself. So the final advice that I have for everyone is keeping it simple, right? Sometimes, and I've seen this unfortunately, and this is not just Pakistan, it's all over the world, we will choose a more complex architecture just because it's a hot thing, or just because it's a new thing for us. We think it's part of our growth that if we do that, we get to learn something new. So what we end up doing then is we end up building something that is unstable or unmaintainable sometimes, or not in the right way, at the cost of expenditure or growth. That's something to keep in mind. Let's try to solve the problem and not create more problems that are already out there. And that was it from my side. I hope that makes sense. And have a good day.
Thank you so much for sitting here. We have time for just like 1 or 2 questions. I see webinar days. There will be some questions to us. Maybe us there. Helen, you good?
Sorry. Or I will question to the fact that we picture that I already would that's the same. Yeah, there's enough. So I see here that it's just question we have that here, but instances of the sellers and we have others to close the others too.
I mean, so this is just a high level biopic. So you can have whatever you want.
So based on my understanding, SE service has let's say the spin off file. So
Every service can have a single file if you want.
no, technically speaking, I think because your service has to match this one optimizer that's declared. And here you go, this is a simple issue that I'm going to come to.
Yeah, that's
a little feedback. So you said, my duty do so this was more to me a one request.
basically, that's what I'm saying. You're basically using the principles of microservices. You're merging all of your code into that. But when you're trying to speed modular, that's the basic idea you want it. Speed architecture is another way of looking at it, right? So you want speed isolation. This is nothing new, right? We've been looking at it for the last 50 years. You want high precision and low latency. That's what we're trying to do here. And we're just doing it as that.
So if you add like I mean, Sunday about this exactly. It's for SED is that there if you use services that have money right in the products. So and it's just a Microservices from us to have that is about way or not even system.
I don't know how we have multiple repositories.
Like it was like you service to that you know
There is time. But if you have a monolith, right? Monolith are usually in a steady program.
yeah, but on the downside of that side is doing getting on changing the response one of the services that impact delivering and by with the tools.
Not necessarily. Git actions are pretty nice. You can actually ask it to only do stuff if a particular folder has changed. So if you are building on a modular, assuming you just go down this road, then you can actually build the image just for that service in the one class.
That is scary.
I think it's a plan to
So, I think all of this depends on finding out the right boundary context. So, what will you recommend? How do we find the right boundary context? Because so all in the same context. Then we go into the planning to the plan. So, what will you recommend? How will we find the right boundary context?
I'm going to change that question, right? Because I would say you can't find extremely bad context, at least if you're in a use case for it. Because you don't look at the problem you're solving, you don't add the solution for it. So you can try, but now since you have a much simpler implementation, changing it is easier, right? So there are, again, very good resources which you can go in and you can learn it by how to pay good context. But my point over here is that even if you don't do that, actually, you can always start moving in that direction within a monolith. And then eventually, if you choose to do that, that's like
So if you implement a building system at the other stage, like where there's a system we call ants, that's what we use with an actual pipeline-based building system. We're doing everything that start with the beginning of C.
I think it depends on the project. For most of us, I'm assuming when you're talking about building a pipeline dependencies located.
Yeah, basically yes.
Yeah, so it really depends on your product. If you are building a pipeline dependencies, then it would need a build system for that. But if you're building like a suppose on your app, then it's also not a pipeline. Kind of just does it for you when it pays.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.